Inflation in the U.S. has jumped to 4% for the first time in 3 years, and fuel prices have definitely helped fuel that increase. A new report by the Brookings Institute says nearly half of U.S. families couldn't afford basic necessities. In 2024, nearly 1/3 of middle-income Americans are struggling to afford those same necessities, and credit card debt has reached record high levels. It does sound grim. It absolutely sounds grim. Nobody is debating that. But there are segments of the economy that are doing so well. But if the economy, if it's bad, if it's good, why does it feel so bad? I mean, people are saying, and we had this conversation just the other day with my guest, Douglas White. He's the director of the LSUS Center for Business and Economic Research. He's an economist, and today you're also going to be wearing a hat as both probably a therapist and a clairvoyant. And again, the question, if the economy is good, as many people are saying that it is, why does it feel so darn bad?
I think there's two reasons. First, the number one, or what I think the overlying reason is that under Biden we had runaway inflation, and we're starting to see that again with the Iranian war. You know, you just said inflation hit 4.2% last month. So we see higher prices, and it's showing up in food and gas. And if you're most people, you go to the grocery store at least once, if not 2 or 3 times a week. So food prices are up 25% over basically 4 years ago. So you see that at least once a week, if not twice a week. And then gas prices too. They're up, I think, 50% compared to a year ago. So again, you're filling your car up once a week. You see those prices. You're reminded, you're basically smacked in the face with prices are higher. And unless you've gotten a wage increase to match those prices, it's costing you more. It's leaving you less money left over to do all the other things. So, less money to go out, less money to spend on your kids, less money on vacation. And again, we're getting right to the point where this is the busiest driving season, right, for vacation.
And they are seeing those signs everywhere with the price of gas.
And then I think the other big thing is just in general, the nation as a whole is just more divided. So what you'll see is when a Democrat's in charge, Republicans are going to tell you the economy's not doing very well. When Republicans in charge, you're going to see Democrats saying the economy's not doing well. So, and we all live in our information silos or bubbles, so you can...
We're going to talk about that. Right. We're going to talk about all of that because all of that absolutely comes into play. How long have you been an economist? How long have you been in this business?
20 years.
20 years? So you've seen economic ups and economic downs.
Right.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is this one of the more interesting times that you've ever seen?
So, I would say we haven't seen normal times since 2008.
Tell me what normal is first. Tell me what normal is.
All right. So normal would be not everybody talking about the economy. Right?
It's not the
it's
thing
in the background. It's
right.
not. You're not focusing on it.
Right.
I would say it would be where we have low inflation, steady growth. Job market prospects are pretty good. And I'd also say there's not anxiety. And so I think that's another thing I didn't mention when we talk about why people aren't happy. I think there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty. The economy's changing, and people are worried. Am I
the next?
Yes. Am I ready for the next role of the economy? So do my job skills translate for the future? I also think that we're slightly older. So, I think there's a lot more angst about, okay, if I lose my job, can I replace it? Mm-hmm. Can I replace it with something that pays the same amount of salary that I'm used to getting now? 53, I'd hate to think, what would I do if I had to go out tomorrow and start over?
So you can go to Amazon University, which has just been announced down in Baton Rouge, and they will train you how to become an HVAC tech, an electrician, something having to do with building data centers, because those are the skills right now that are needed. It's really interesting. For so many years, everybody aspired to white collar. And now the jobs seem to be trending more to blue collar. And I think that does create a lot of uncertainty. There are entire groups of young people at the university where you work who are debating, do I even need to start a 4-year degree in this particular field of study? Will it even exist in 4 years with AI?
Right. And I think there's been talk about this. Mike Rowe's done a lot with his, was it the Works Foundation but there's been talk, used to be, I think his name was Richard Florida,
Yes. Oh,
talking
absolutely.
about,
Yeah.
and he would talk about, that
The creative class.
the creative class and that all these blue collar jobs that he'd go out and talk to CEOs and they'd tell them that we can't fill the positions because they weren't creative, right? You didn't have your own freedom. If you're a welder, you're going to weld what you have to weld. Or if you're cutting hair, you have a little bit of creativity. And so he talked about how that we're having trouble filling this. Well, maybe the economy's rotating back to where those jobs are in higher demand, and because they're in higher demand, they're going to pay better, and that's going to encourage people to maybe take those jobs.
That is going to potentially encourage that. A story that I was doing very recently over at Fiberbond by Eaton in Minden, they have done tremendously well. They're expanding. They want to expand even more, but in order to do that, they've got to have employees that they're competing with everyone along the I-20 corridor to find those employees. And so businesses are having to be more creative. I think they're having to pay more. They're having to consider the needs of their employees more. And maybe that's a good place to be. I heard a quote the other day from Bloomberg, and it was so interesting. And it was, I think you'll relate to this really well. The economy feels bad because the numbers measuring it were never intended to measure your life. And I think that's true when we talk about inflation, because core inflation, like the number that we got this morning, that 4.2%, it doesn't measure two important things that most Americans do every week.
Right. If you're looking at core inflation, we're taking out food and energy.
Food and energy are not counted in core inflation. Why are those two things not counted when they seem to be the things that are most impacted by inflation?
Right, and so that's why the Fed takes them out when we look at core inflation. They're looking for things that are relatively stable. And so, because if they're stable and their prices go up, that's definitely a bad sign. They're arguing that food can vary because you have a crop failure somewhere. That's not really inflationary. That's not really anybody's fault.
We've seen that with eggs, and we saw that and seeing it now with beef.
Right. So, the screwworm's back, right?
Yeah.
Another great thing to celebrate.
Yeah. Tell us about the steaks that you had the other night. This was crazy.
Right. So, in my household, my wife usually does the grocery shopping. I do the cooking, but I just happened to look at the, just normal steak from Brookshire's, and it was like $29. And it's like, wow. We didn't pay $29 for a steak 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So, so again, that's and I knew inflation was up, but that really sets it in.
Right.
And now you think about that, okay, so that's what you're paying at home. You don't have any overhead. You're not paying staff for electricity to run your restaurant. So if you're if you're a restaurant and your core input prices have gone up like that, well, if you were only making, I don't know what restaurants' margins are, but they're not that great. So let's say 5%, 10%, all of a sudden, all your profits are going to disappear because you have higher food costs. So you got to raise, your prices, which then makes it more expensive to go out, which again feeds into that cycle of you go out and your fancy meal out that used to cost $75 or $100 is now costing you $125 or $150. So again, even if you're doing well, that gets kind of tiring and, upsets you.
It's unsustainable.
Right.
I mean, it really is. Where maybe you could have gone and paid for $125 if you hit $175, $200, maybe you can't do that, or you can't do it as often.
Right. So if you used to go out twice a week or twice a month, now you go out once. And, and that feeds into the economy too, right? Because now that restaurant that used to get your business twice a month is only getting your business once a month. So, that makes it harder for them to survive.
Let's move to the jobs picture. The local unemployment rate, what are we seeing there in local jobs?
Right, so that number is actually pretty good. So,
good.
Bossier,
I'm happy that we've got some good.
Bossier Parish was at 3.5% last month. Caddo was at 4%. If you had asked me, when I was growing up, we thought, when I was in grad school and stuff, we thought the natural rate of unemployment was somewhere around 5%. So to get to 3.5, 4%, we'd tell you is unsustainable, you'd have to see inflation. Well, we are seeing inflation, but it's not because of the low unemployment rate, or maybe just a little bit, but not really because of the low unemployment rate.
I'm going to add a Debbie Downer. Sorry
Sure.
about that. I'm just going to throw it out there, and then you tell me if it's true or not. Do we have any way of knowing the impact of long-term unemployed on that unemployment rate? Because there are those people who are no longer being measured,
Right.
because they have either stopped looking, they've given up, or whatever the reason may be. And so might that unemployment rate actually be higher?
So I will answer the answer to that is probably at least slightly yes. If you looked at what they call the U6 unemployment, that's a broader measurement. It looks at if you're working part-time but you'd prefer to be full-time, you would be considered underemployed. If you would work, if you could find one, but you're no longer looking, you would be in that U6 measurement. That's always higher than the official unemployment rate we'll talk about.
But at least there's a measurement of it.
There is a measurement of that.
Good.
But I would also say that if you look at our overall job market here, if you look at the labor force, our labor force has been relatively consistent over the last 2 years, meaning that we're not seeing that number go down because people are dropping out of the labor force. We're seeing that number be there with a pretty similar number of people in the labor force. So to me, that's a good sign. That means people who are looking for work here are finding work.
Well, that is good to know. I was going to talk a little about some numbers that we got just yesterday. There was something called the State of the Nation Project at Tulane University, and there were 14 different categories that it took a look at. And everything from quality of life and how satisfied people were about living in Louisiana to economic development and economic and job prospects, just a variety of things. And what that found was in Louisiana, we were 51st. Now it gauged every state plus Washington, D.C. So we were 51st in labor force participation rate, and I think that goes back to how many people are actually looking for jobs in the labor market. 47th in long-term unemployment rate. So our numbers aren't trending well there in those people who are sitting out of the job market. And I'm sure those people who have gotten so frustrated or so upset or aren't trained in the types of skills that they need to get jobs, there's certainly some of those people who are unhappy with the economy right now, obviously. The Dallas Fed came out with something. They're very interesting, and for people who don't know, the Dallas Fed is our Fed. It not only represents Texas, a little bit of New Mexico, a little bit maybe of, is it Oklahoma? I'm not sure, and then a little bit of Northwest Louisiana. But they reported that it's been hard for them to tell if the strong payroll that they're seeing reflects actual job creation for unemployed or job-to-job transitions for the currently employed. Is that something that the numbers can tell you?
So that's an interesting question. I haven't really studied that, so I don't know how to answer that. The only thing I can say is everywhere I go in town, people seem to be looking for employees. So again, I think that's a strong sign that that even though people are unhappy, the economy here, I don't want to say it's booming or great, but we seem to just keep going along and growing at a pretty consistent rate, or at least not shrinking at all. So it would be nice to maybe have a little bit of a boom, but I'm a big believer in consistent over ups and downs. So I'd like to see faster growth here, but we're at least still in the positive direction, right?
People then may not be able to find the perfect job, but they're able to find a job.
Right.
And then they can go from there. So yeah, that's a good thing. Now, sales taxes. This is something that you definitely take a look at in your quarterly reports, and they are the 800-pound gorilla for city governments locally. They really do depend on sales taxes. And we tend to look at sales tax and the contribution that they're making to governments' bottom lines and think that if sales taxes are higher, that people are doing well, they're spending more. But the flip side of that is if prices are higher, right? Sales taxes could be higher. People could be buying less but spending more on the things that they're buying. So the sales taxes don't really tell us definitively that the economy locally is doing better, do they?
Right. So my takeaway is looking at the sales tax, we're at least doing as well of, if not slightly better than the rate of inflation. So to me, that signals that we at least have some growth. That everything that we're seeing is not just driven by the inflation or the higher prices. So again, we'd like to see it be maybe slightly higher, but it's still, until we get to where inflation's higher than the growth of sales tax, so I wouldn't be too concerned about that.
That's good. And also definitely would be concerned if sales tax
Right.
returns fell off the cliff.
Right. We don't want to see sales tax numbers go down
Go down.
because that would obviously be a sign that people are restricting their consumption, and that's a bad sign for the economy.
That's a very bad sign. And there have been times before that that we have seen that. Back, I think in 2008, was that the mortgage crisis? I get
Right.
my crises
Right. So
confused.
2008's the mortgage crisis,
Yes.
where Bush said this sucker could go down.
Yes.
And yeah, so 2008 was so as I said, we haven't seen normal times since 2008, right? Because we came out of the 2008 recession. We had the Obama stimulus, which at the time was, people were like, oh my God, it's so big, and probably needed to be bigger.
Right.
The Fed basically then kept interest rates at zero for way too long, which I think had all sorts of negative effects throughout the economy. I think it was great for these big unicorn Amazons and Ubers and whatnot. They can borrow money at 0%. Hey, great. Who doesn't like borrowing money at 0%?
Free money.
Whereas
Yeah.
Main Street businesses have to pay rent and everything. They weren't getting 0%, So I think and this I think goes back to why we're seeing people unhappy. We started distorting the economy back then. Honestly, I don't think we had a normal economy probably until we got back to probably maybe the first 2.5 years of Trump, and then COVID hits. And so then COVID hits and screws up the economy again. We have, oh, everybody stay home. Well, that's obviously a disaster for the economy. So then we start giving people money. It messes up all the supply chains. How many Trump stimuluses did we have? 2, 3, and then
Seems like at least 3.
and then Biden came in, and we got the Biden stimulus on top of that, which was probably a mistake. And again, I'm not going to blame Biden for all the inflation, because you can have supply side inflation and demand driven inflation. But I think most economists will agree that the Biden stimulus probably added a point or two to the inflation we saw. A lot of it was supply side, but the stimulus was probably not needed, but got it anyways. So, we had that inflation. We're finally getting, I don't want to say finally got inflation back to close to the 2% that the Fed wants. And then we started having the war in the Middle East again. So now we're up to 4. We'll see, or not 4, we're at 4.2. Let's not drop that 0.2, because it all adds up.
It all adds up. It all adds up. Yeah.
And so we'll see. I saw somebody said that unless gas and oil really go up, that this is probably the highest we'll see it print. But again, even if it just stays at 4, who wants to see prices rise at 4% every month?
No, exactly. And we're not just talking about gasoline. We're talking about diesel fuel, which has gone up dramatically more because there are fewer refineries for diesel fuel. And the other day, a friend of mine had gone to get some avgas for a short air trip. Avgas is $7 a gallon now, and not too terribly long ago, it was $5 a gallon. So we're seeing a lot of.
I think in the
that.
CPI print they said airline tickets were up 24%, 25% over. So yeah, I mean, again, prime vacation season, right? Hope you bought your airline tickets
early
months ago instead of waiting until the last minute.
Yeah. All of this weighs into how people feel about themselves, the economy, the outlook, their uncertainty, whether they feel good about how things are going or not. You remember James Carville, obviously a political savant from Louisiana, and he coined that term, it's the economy stupid, years ago. And it's always been the economy stupid, because the things that affect us, we care more about than the things affecting that guy behind the tree.
I agree. And, back when he said it in the 90s, it's the economy stupid. I think we could change it today. it's the inflation, stupid. Because, I think people can put up with relatively modest growth. They can't put up with modest growth if prices are going up 5%, 10%. That, I mean, your food bill, as I said earlier, is up 25% over 4 years ago. How many of us have a 25% raise compared to 4 years ago? I'm guessing not many. So
Yeah.
that means every time you're buying basic necessities, you're
You're
spending
losing.
more. Yeah, you're losing.
You're losing ground.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you throw in, we have a rental market study we do that basically, everywhere in this country, I've done this study in 8, maybe 9 states. Basically, anywhere in the study, we've done it, unless you're making 80% of your area median income, basically there's not enough housing for people to not be cost burdened, which is spending more than 30% of your income towards your rental housing.
Let's stop for
Sure.
cost burdened. People are spending 30 and some 50%.
Right. So
of
50
their-
we consider severely cost burdened. And, if you're extremely low income, which is 30% or less of AMI, almost
a lot of people
over
locally.
half the renters are severely cost burdened there. In the state of Louisiana, if I remember the numbers from the study off the top of my head, I believe 50% of the renters are cost burdened or greater. So, half the people renting are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. Again, this leaves less for anything else. So if you're spending it on housing, that's less for your car, that's less for food, that's less for vacations, that's less for just, anything. And it's always, it's been a growing trend over the last decade and a half, but, it's catching up and you're getting pulled from that end. Now you're getting pulled from this end with inflation. And then you throw in, we haven't even mentioned AI yet. So we'll
Right.
throw in the whole uncertainty of like how that's going to affect the economy. So I think, and, I'm going to blame Trump for some of this too, with the whole tariffs, no tariffs.
Maybe tariffs, some tariffs.
Yeah, $1,000 or $100,000 H1 whatever
Visa to get
that.
in. Right.
Oh no, I didn't mean that. So uncertainty. Businesses don't deal with uncertainty. People don't deal with uncertainty. We could deal with bad policy, but it has to be bad policy. Okay, now we know we have this policy, and we can adjust to deal with it. When it's the policy's changing weekly, daily, hourly, then you can't.
Right.
People can't deal with that. Businesses can't deal with that. They can't plan ahead.
And we're talking about businesses. We're sitting in one of the small businesses in downtown Shreveport. It's the Remington Suites and Spa. It's a beautiful business in downtown Shreveport. We're not too far from the casinos on the riverfront. We've got casinos in downtown Shreveport, also right across the river in Bossier City. Casino take is up.
Right.
More people are traveling by air into Shreveport Regional Airport. Is that a disconnect? I mean, we got all these people who are like, oh my gosh, I can just barely afford gas in my vehicle,
So
but I'm going to the casino.
I get asked this question all the time, and I have no idea how to answer it because I don't know. To me, the casinos being up seems like that's a positive sign.
Yeah.
But I have people who are like, aren't you worried that it's maybe people are so desperate they're going to try and, win at the casinos? Maybe. I think, though, I think the casinos being up, at least in the sense it's good because that means people are actually going, which means the restaurants in the casinos are probably busier.
Yeah.
Means the bartending staff,
they're keeping the jobs.
They're keeping the jobs. If you're staying in the hotels, that the services to clean the rooms, all that means they're being utilized. Hopefully, it means they're being tipped well.
If you win,
because it's very easy. You could, if you really want to gamble, you could sit in your couch at home, pull out your phone. You could bet either legal. Well, I guess it's all legal these days, but you could bet sports at least legally, or you can play the prediction markets, which I don't know.
That's a conversation for another day.
I don't know if those are
Holy
legal or
smokes.
illegal, but
I think some are borderline.
but
you're
right. So it's when people ask me, I say I think the casinos being up, I think that's a good sign. I mean, one, I think it means that they're doing a good job of marketing themselves, which hopefully means that people are coming into the area. You're coming into the area, maybe you see something you like, maybe you come back, or at least, maybe you leave the casino. I know the casinos don't want you to leave, but maybe you leave the
Go to a
casinos and go to a restaurant or
tour around or
right.
something. We've got about 30 seconds left, Doug, and I want you to put on your clairvoyant hat, and I want you to look ahead next 6 months, 12 months, and what do you see? What do you see locally?
Locally.
Locally. I'm going to make you talk locally.
You know, I am surprisingly optimistic about the local area.
An optimistic economist. That is awesome.
Yes, you know, I always tell people I really felt like Shreveport and downtown was on an upswing, and then COVID hit, and I feel like COVID just really slammed on the
Took the wind
brakes
out.
and pushed us back 2 years or whatever, and maybe 3 years, and I really kind of feel like there's momentum again down here. The casinos are doing well. They're merging. I'll predict, I have no inside information on this, I think that's going to move more of them on land and off the boats, which I think makes them more attractive.
That would make them more attractive.
I feel like downtown seems busier, that more restaurants, more businesses. So, we can argue about the AI plant or data center, but that's a big announcement for us. I feel like we've had a lot of big wins with businesses announcements coming here recently. So I think the areas, I am positively, I'm at least optimistic.
I'm glad to end on optimism. Doug, thank you so much for being with us. Doug White is with the Center for Business and Economic Research at LSUS. Thank you for being here. I'd love to thank the Remington Suite, great local business, and we appreciate them being a partner in this podcast. And folks, if you're interested in the local economy, how things are going, the things you need to be thinking about or maybe even worried about, I would absolutely urge you to subscribe to the Shreveport-Bossier City Advocate to find out all the news of the day. And I have a weekly business newsletter that comes out twice a week. Please also subscribe to that. We will definitely keep you in the know. And we will see you the next time on The Deal. So thank you for being with us.